Okay, today I'm gonna talk about useReducer, this hook API in React. So, what is useReducer? useReducer is an alternative of useState to manage states in state in component. So, use case. So we come to the source code folder, and again we use this empty project as beginning, and here I'm gonna create a login page. Login without reducer index login page, right? So suppose what would we do if we don't use reducer and we just simply use useState to manage state in this page? So assume there is a login form here, right? So normally we have username. We need to get a username from the login page, right? From the input field. So we need a password, and we need a is loading false. So when we go through the authentication, and we set the request, we post the request to server to check if this user exists or if the username and the password match with each other, right? We need a display is loading on the page to show it show it to user, right? So we said that we need a is error, right? If there's no such a user, probably we're gonna display an error on the page. And last is, suppose the username matches the password, so the status should be the status is logged in status should be set into true, right? Set as true. So this is how we do it without login page states without use reducer. However, useReducer and useState, they both manage the state in the function component. So what is the difference? As you can see here, so now we only have two input fields, username and password, because this is a login page, right? Authentic and log in. We need a function auth. We're gonna send data users.json, and then we get we retrieve the data. So if there is a response, we're gonna do if username, check if username match password. So auth method, we pass a user object, right? Because we have a username and a password, right? So user object. If user object, the user object contains the value we get from the input field. So username equal to res.data user name. At the same time, user object dot username password equal to res.data password. Then we do something. Suppose it is logged in, or else we just catch. Yeah, normally we do something like this, right? Of course, this is how to say, this is this is the pseudocode, right? I didn't put, because I want to save some time, I didn't put any UI code here, but basically it is going through something like this, right? So right here you need to set is loading true, and right here you set is logged in true. Is loading false. Set is loading false, and is error true, right? Something like this. This is what we do. But as you can see here, so you are maintaining too many states at the same time, right? Many lines of a code. And suppose this is a register page, sign up page. So besides username and password, there are like email, postcode, and many other things, right? So it's gonna be pretty exhausting. So how do we use Reducer? So it is pretty similar to Reducer in Redux, but it is different, because in Redux, Reducer manages state between different components, and this is also maintaining a state which could be used many components at the same time. But this Reducer is to separate your actions with your state, which gonna make your code looks more logical and cleaner. So I'm gonna show you right here in account application as an example again. So I have account, we have index. So so suppose I have a state and I have a button to add one. So how do we use this reducer? We're gonna declare it count state dispatch use reducer and init state. So right here you need to declare your own reducer. It is basically a function which accept proof state and action, right? So right here I'm gonna set up the init state as zero. So instead of this, just similar to Redux, so inside of this I have a switch. So action dot tab, and there are several actions that you can dispatch to reducer. I have increment. If it is increment pre-state at 1, right? So this use reducer, you can just pass two parameters here. The first one is the reducer function to manage the dispatch, your dispatched actions, and this is the initial state, is the the initial value, and two things has been returned, which is a state, and of course this is the initial value, right? Or the value after action dispatched. So dispatch is a function that you can use to specify which kind of action you want to do. So I'm gonna do dispatch tab commit. Right, something like this. So now I'm gonna use it. 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5, right? So normally we don't just put the reducer right here to optimize the file structure. We have individual independent reducer. Right? It just looks like this is much more this is much more cleaner, right? So, and the logic is looks it just looks clear to readers, to other developers. So let's back to this file. So in this case, login page without use reducer and only manage state using useState, and then how to use reducer in count app. How to use reducer to opt as code in login page. So right here I'm gonna import a login with reducer. Right, so now we can optimize this code. Then we don't need this anymore. So instead we can set up an initial value, an initial state right here. So let's do const init state equal to user name empty, password empty, is loading false, is error false, is logged in false. So now we need to get the state, right? So how do we get a state? State is gonna be returned by useReducer. Right. Of course, we need a reducer here. Export default reducer pref state and action. Right, so we don't need this anymore. I'm gonna say optimize login page using useReducer. Of course, we need to import right now we have reducer. Okay, and a state will be returned. Right, so what we need to display here is actually a state. Right, we can just get all the values from state. So right here is it is not set is loading anymore. So how do we declare this reducer? Switch action.tab, and so suppose your login action is success, then what you need to return, you returns the state. The state gonna be something like this: state dot state, and you change the property, the key value pair, in this way. So if this is a success, if you have logged in successfully or your username matches the password, so it's loading gonna be false, and yes, logged in is set to true. Right, so besides success, there is a login, means that you start the authentication process. So its loading is set to true, and its login is no, it is logging. Right, so username, password, and suppose your login process has failed, means also you need to stop its loading, and its login was initially set as false, so now is error is set to true. Right, then you dispatch the actions here. When you start this function, you just dispatch login. Right? You start logging in, and when this is true, success. Right here it is error. So dispatch error. Right, so based on each action here, so the state will be manipulated. A new state will be generated based on your initial state as the action you have dispatched. Right, so if it is you dispatch a login action, so its loading gonna be set to true, and when you get the state is loading, it's gonna be true. Right, So right here it is the same thing, and right here is the same thing. And if you want to get the state dot yes error, you're gonna get a value which is false or which is true, right here. So you can just use it in your UI part. You can just display something like, if this is an error, you can just display yes error message or empty, right? So this object again is we can get this object based on the user input, right? This is how we use useReducer. You may think that, well, without useReducer, we only need one page of coding, but now we need another one. We have separate that action from the UI parts. It looks like it's more complex, but actually it is not, because when you look at this, when you dispatch some action, you will get the corresponding state, which is very, very logical and reasonable to developers. So this is the reason why, and this is a use case of the useReducer. Sometimes there are many states at the same time on the same page, and sometimes you gonna use the state from a different component. You can just call useReducer to generate something like this, a state and a dispatch, right? So now this one, the state is an object, right? Let's back to this count type. So of course we can just set up the state like this, count .0, right? So when we get the value, it should be state.count, something like this. So nothing seems special. Right? You can just use it this way to separate your action with your UI. So how useReducer to optimize the logic part. Yeah, this is the basic useReducer, and the rest of I think this API is very flexible, and it depends on your use case and projects, when you want to use useState and when you want to use Reducer. This is all based on the experiences of programmers. So yeah, this is pretty much about the useReducer today.